It's been nearly 5 years since the release of Doom Eternal, and that game holds a special place in my heart because it was the first game that I bought when lockdown started. You know, that thing that kept everyone locked inside and isolated for a good 6 to 8 months. I can't tell you how much time I spent playing Eternal in those early days, and I still hold it in high regards today for its tight gameplay and combat. Fast forward some 5 years later, and we've arrived at the release of Doom the Dark Ages, the third game in the Doom trilogy. And after 100%ing the game, I'm here to tell you that while this is still the same Doom game, the formula that you've come to love over the past couple of iterations has seen a slight change in the gameplay loop and how you interact with it. Eternal is known for its flashy, high flying movement that saw you swinging around the battlefield, where here in Dark Ages, you're going to be much more grounded like a tank, where you stand and fight with your shield. I mentioned this at the top of the review because you're going to be wanting to compare these two games almost relentlessly, and maybe even with 2016 as well. And it really all depends and boils down to how much you love either of those game systems and how you like how they're changed here. Eternal forced you to weapon swap, use that chainsaw, that flame belch to stay alive in combat, but in Dark Ages you have a lot more freedom in how you get your health, your armor, and your ammo back. This also feels like a great jumping in point for people who might be a little bit newer to the franchise because Dark Ages is a prequel story that takes place before the events of 2016 and Eternal, so no worries about being lost in the lore or the story. And speaking of the story, this game features a lot more cutscenes than what you're used to in previous Doom entries. You get to see a lot more of the Slayer and the largest cast of supporting characters that I've ever seen in a Doom game. There's sections where you pilot a giant mech like something out of Pacific Rim, which makes a lot of sense since Hugo Martin, I learned, worked in the art department on that movie. And then to cap it off, you ride your fire-breathing dragon into battle as you step on the gas pedal. And yes, there is a gas pedal.
Stronger than maybe even you.
As I do with all my reviews, I like to start out with a little bit of a technical block. I went ahead and I played Doom the Dark Ages through the Game Pass app on PC, running an RTX 4080 and an i7 13700K with all the settings at Nightmare and DLSS set to quality. It is also available on Xbox Series consoles and PS5 as well. From a technical standpoint, I didn't run into a single crash. There were a few times where like a button prompt wouldn't appear, but nothing major. And I was able to get a constant 120 FPS in nearly all scenes. And this was something I was a little bit worried about because they did announce that they were going to be moving to these more larger, open, sprawling combat arenas instead of the more contained arenas that we'd come to see over the last couple of games. And I'm happy to report that for me, it did run great. One thing to note here is that this game does have forced ray tracing, so you will need a minimum of an RTX 2060 to be able to run the game, which sadly does leave a large portion of players out of luck. And it's unfortunate that's the case because the id Tech engine looks phenomenal as always, and I'm really impressed with what they were able to do here in Dark Ages. There's a lot of dope looking skyboxes, there's a lot of dope looking environments that you get to traverse and go through, and the gore is really good too because you're shooting enemies and you're taking chunks of their like whole side out, and I thought that was really cool. I have heard some reports of crashing on PC, and id Software have made a note on the Steam page that they do recommend that you update the drivers, so make sure that's something to do before launching the game. And as always, if you plan on picking the game up, it's best to look at a few other videos with comparable specs to yours so that you have an idea of what you'd be looking at. Alright, let's rip this band-aid off early and talk about the music. If you haven't been living under a rock for the last couple of years, you'll know about the public falling out that former Doom composer Mick Gordon had with the developers id Software and studio head Marty Stratton, with accusations of poor working conditions and unpaid work. What followed was Eternal's soundtrack never being released on Apple Music or Spotify, and Mick Gordon himself losing out on tons of opportunities as a result to damage of his reputation. If you're interested in learning more about this whole situation, I would highly suggest checking out Mild Conviction's video that breaks down the whole situation in a lot greater detail. It's important to mention this because, unfortunately, Mick Gordon did not return here to do the soundtrack, and instead a group by the name of Finishing Move were brought in to put their own spin on the title. I think that the music is fine, to be honest. There's only like 2 to 3 tracks that in my eyes really stood out to me in this OST, and a lot of the time it ended up just being kind of samey. I would also check when you boot the game up. My audio for the music was set to 70% by default, and I had to turn that up to 100 just because I want that music to be as loud as possible, especially during the combat encounters. Something about the heavy synths mixed in with those chainsaw guitar elements from Mick Gordon, man. I miss it. You can feel that his fingerprints aren't on this one, and it's a real shame because he's just fucking awesome, man. Especially in 2016 and especially Eternal. That was my shit. I had to resort to like YouTube playlists to find some of those music, like audio rips directly from the game. I think that the combat music here in Dark Ages is good, but like I said, it does just feel kind of samey. And I don't want to turn this whole video into the discussion about the music and the soundtrack, but TLDR, Mick Gordon, you're missed. Finishing move, I thought you guys did a good job, circumstances considered. Now, I should probably give a little bit of context here in the review and say that I've never actually played the original Doom games, and the only ones that I've ever played is 2016 Doom, Eternal, and now Dark Ages. So a lot of my comparisons, a lot of my thoughts are going to draw from those games and what I ended up taking away from them and how I think that affects Dark Ages here. So, do I think that Doom the Dark Ages is worth it? Yes, I do think it's worth it, but that question ultimately depends on what you want out of it, and how it might vary from what I got out of the game. I played through the story on Ultra Violence and found it to be a good challenge for the most part. No encounter or area really made it seem unfair or unbalanced. There were a few that took me a couple tries, but like I said, nothing that was egregiously unbalanced. The game does offer up a host of customization options in terms of gameplay modifiers, like making you deal more damage, slowing down enemy projectiles, you can speed them up. There's all sorts of things that you can tune and cater to whatever your preference would be. I think this goes a long way in helping maybe grab people that are not fans of the franchise or maybe a little bit newer and kind of help them get acclimated. But this also is a way for players to mix up that formula if they want to just crank those sliders and put the game to its full pace. I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about the story in Doom the Dark Ages. I won't spend too much time because in reality you won't really care too much about the story, you just want to rip and tear demons. But the story in Doom the Dark Ages is a prequel to the previous titles that sees the Slayer taking on hordes and hordes of demons in medieval times this go around. I know I briefly touched on this earlier, but what they did here with this title was take a lot of the story and the lore and put it into the cutscenes in the missions themselves instead of hiding them in lore entries and codex entries like the past couple of games. Some people are really going to dig this, other people are really going to dislike it. Personally, I loved having all these cutscenes, all these backstories for all the characters that we're meeting. Like I said, others aren't going to vibe with it. You can skip through all the cutscenes, go ahead, you might be lost, but whatever, that's your choice. I think it is cool that we have a different take on the way the story is presented, and I, for one, really liked how they did it here. And I mean, come on, dude, it's always badass to see the Slayer doing some cool shit. I also do want to touch a little bit on the villain here. He's alright, he's pretty one-dimensional. Just a fun little fact, though, about the villain. He's played by the same actor who played Eddie Thawne in the Flash TV show, so there's a little bit of tidbit for you. And the human characters that you see pop up here should be familiar if you played Eternal's story at all. The campaign itself is going to take place over the course of 22 missions that vary in length from 15 minutes to sometimes an hour long. The missions themselves, for a majority of the time, are going to see you controlling the Slayer in the traditional Doom sense, with you working your way through these different maps, these different locations, and then you have the addition of the mech and the dragon. These sections are another part that I feel like people are either going to like them or they're not going to like them. They did a good job, I think, at breaking up the gameplay and giving you a little bit of a break, but while also keeping the game fresh. I will say out of the two, the mech one was probably the most one-dimensional out of those. There's really not much for you to do other than the left click, the right click, a dodge, and then occasionally you get a weapon or two. The dragon sections, on the other hand, were a lot of fun because while essentially you are still doing the same thing, you're flying around, you're taking out dropships, but you're also able to land at different areas across these maps at certain locations and then explore on foot as the Slayer. Some of them are mission objectives, some of them are going to be completely optional. So if you prefer just that Doom Slayer gameplay, these deviations might be something that you start to hate more and more as they pop up, but I felt they did a good job at breaking up the gameplay. And personally, I don't think they ever really overstayed their welcome. The Doomslayer's gameplay is one that is mostly still the same, but it have went back to the drawing board a little bit and changed a few things from Eternal. You no longer have the dodge or double jump ability, and instead have the ability to parry and melee. So enemy attacks are going to come in essentially two different forms. Red attacks are ones that can be blocked with the shield, but they'll deplete the overall health of that shield over time. Then the green attacks are ones that can be parried back at the enemies, stunning them, and then dealing damage to them. The timing is very, very generous. If you find it's too generous, you can go ahead and you can tweak that and make it so that it's not. I know I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but a lot of this enjoyment for this game is going to boil down to how much you like or dislike the changes to the gameplay elements here. I, for one, liked them moving away from the weapon swapping strict nature that Eternal had. Dark Ages allows you to play how you want within the confines of its own sandbox. In theory, you could just use one gun the whole time, but the more and more that you play the game, the more and more situational you'll see that weapons become. Maybe the Cycler is better for taking out shields. The shotgun is great for 1v1 encounters versus bigger enemies, but it isn't going to be quite as effective if you're going up against giant hordes of enemies, so switching to something like the Polarizer or the Ravager might benefit you more. And as you're playing through the different levels and the areas, you'll come across a slew of collectibles and materials, just like the last couple of Doom games. You'll be finding upgrades for his weapons, his gear, and this time around, they've actually stripped back a lot of the customization and skill tree unlocks that Eternal had. This game offers up a much simpler system that still allows for a little bit of a power fantasy to be built, but maybe not enough if you liked how Eternal handled it. Each weapon that you come across is also going to have an alternate firing mode that changes up how it behaves. The game will also allow you to upgrade and choose different paths and different perks for those weapons. If you've played any of the last couple Doom games, it's pretty similar to how they handled those. And the combat itself is absolutely fantastic. You've heard me talk about it more, but I want to make it clear that I love Doom Eternal, and I still do love Doom Eternal. Its gameplay, but I think after sitting on it for a little bit longer, I think I like Doom the Dark Ages combat more. Originally, when it was shown off, the first impressions around the internet were that it looked slow, that it wasn't anything like the past couple Doom games. While that footage, I don't think did it justice, and maybe my footage isn't going to do the game justice, I personally still feel like this game's combat is pretty fast, but not exactly to the cracked out levels that Eternals was. The combat is still very much push forward and fight, but with that addition of the shield and the melee, you can just get up in your enemy's face and just beat the shit out of them, and it's a ton of fun to do. It can be quite the change because the past couple of games have conditioned you to follow this strict gameplay loop, and here they kind of just toss it out the window in favor of how you want to play. Id have got some big cojones for going back to the drawing board and changing up what many would consider to be a perfect combat loop, and it's something they should be commended for. Instead of just phoning it in and making essentially just another Doom game, they tried to do things a little bit different. Some fans are going to feel indifferent about it, some are going to like it, and I applaud them for that. Just the way that you're able to jump into a combat encounter and you can kind of see all the enemies laid out in front of you, and you can be like, okay, I'm going to shotgun blast this guy, I'm going to throw my shield, get some armor back, and then I'm going to go up to this guy, hit him with the recycler. You have a way of like analyzing the battlefield as you jump in, and I think that's something that this game does really well. Overall, I don't think that the combat here is deeper than Eternal, but in my eyes, Dark Ages removes a lot of the bullshit and the stuff that irritated me with Eternal, and that shield and melee combat is so damn satisfying to pull off here. Doom the Dark Ages is a very different Doom game than what you might be accustomed to over the last couple of years, taking key elements of the gameplay and presentation and putting a different spin on them. The combat has seen a bit of a change from the strict and sometimes annoying nature of Doom Eternal to being a little bit more laid back with how you go about approaching combat encounters. While weapon swapping is still going to be prevalent in this title, you're not going to be doing it nearly as much, and with the addition of the melee and parry system, you're going to be able to mix those in as well. Dark Ages feels like id went back to the drawing board and said, how can we make the Slayer more badass? And I'll tell you how. You give him a cape, you give him a shield, you let him pilot a mech, and you give him a pet dragon. It might sound silly to say it out loud, but there's so many times in this game, in this campaign, that I just said to myself, fuck yeah. And at the end of the day, I would say that I was really happy with my time played. It only took me 24 hours, like a little under 24 hours, to grab the 100% on the game. So I do wish there was a little bit more in terms of once you finish the story. Something like a horde mode or a survival mode I think would go so hard in this game, especially with some of the combat arenas and just having great combat in general. I suspect Doom the Dark Ages is going to be a much more divisive title amongst the more hardcore Doom fans, but the simple fact that we've gotten 3 modern Doom games that are all just different titles is their own accomplishment in my eyes. id Software have announced there will be a story DLC that does release sometime in the future. There's no real date on that one, but it should be sometime here within the next 6 months or so if Eternal's post-launch content is any indication. So yes, I do think that Doom the Dark Ages is well worth your time if you're a fan of the franchise and if you're a new player. It's a good jumping in point, and they've got a lot of customization options and ways that you can tweak and make the game play how you want it to play. You can make it a complete cakewalk if you want, or you can make it a literal walk through hell. The game is also going to run you about $70 for the base edition, so the time to cost ratio might be something to consider when picking it up, so Game Pass might be a great option in that regards. But regardless, Doom the Dark Ages I think is a fantastic game to rip and tear through. That about wraps it up here from me. If you did enjoy yourself, Make sure to drop a like on the video and consider subscribing so you can catch all my upcoming reviews and previews in the future. And as always, if you did make it this far, I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day. And this has been my review for Doom the Dark Ages. Thank you for watching.